Welcome back to a brand new edition of Views from the Booth. I am your host, Reed Becker, and joining me today, he is a part of WAER Sports up in Syracuse and the BNE podcast, Bryce Gelman. Bryce, thank you so much for joining me today.
What's up, Reed? How's it been, man? It's been a long time.
Been a very long time, and what a crazy a year it's been since the way the world's changed since we've seen each other in person. But
It's wild.
But we're here today. The NBA season officially kicked off last night, that is, with 2 games with the NBA season tipping off. And here we're going to preview some top storylines for the NBA season. So let's get right into it. For the New York Knicks, we'll start. So for me, with new head coach Tom Thibodeau, I think that he's going to be doing 2 things at once. Because he's a guy that doesn't take any nonsense. He's really good at developing the young players, but I think at the same time he's going to be trying to win, which I think also is going to help build their culture. Because what the Knicks ultimately have to do here is kind of build it the way that Brooklyn did, with all those young players and ultimately drafting them, not going and trading. To build them into top talent, to ultimately then you will be attracting free agents. But in this case for this year, just develop the guys. I think you got something special in Obi Toppin. Emmanuel Quickly has been looking very good so far this preseason. And the biggest question for me is it's a make or break year for guys like Frank Ntilikina, Dennis Smith Jr., and Kevin Knox.
Yeah, so going off from what you said about Thibodeau, I feel like since they said that this past offseason, they really didn't do anything. They signed some bench players, some role guys that can come in and fill their needs, which they have a lot. Hiring a guy like Tom Thibodeau, especially a guy who is not very adept at building winning cultures, he's came into them and, kind of advanced their defenses and won games off of that with great players. So I feel like them doing that was more of a statement to where they are trying to take this team. I think that eventually they're going to have to start playing the young players. I feel like through the first few games, they're going to probably play the vets. That's always what Thibodeau has done. He's played the vets in a lot of different scenarios. That's what he did with the Bulls, with as assistant coach of the Celtics and with the Timberwolves. But at this time, they need to figure out a way to develop the young guys, like you said, and really just drill it into Thibodeau's head that this is more important than winning. We need to, at this point, we need to be making sure that these guys can develop into the players that can eventually contribute to this team. Because as of right now, Kevin Knox, you plug him into any other team, I don't think he does that well. And I'm saying this before the regular season. We have no idea how he's going to play tonight. I am praying that he continues his play for the preseason. But a guy like that, a guy like Frank Ntilikina, who's a 3-and-D guard who barely plays on the Knicks, meaning he wouldn't play on any other team. They need to develop these guys who otherwise wouldn't be good on any other teams. I think, getting into what, the last thing you said about the make or break year between Knox and, Frank and Dennis Smith Jr. It's more of a thing about the latter two, Frank and Dennis Smith, because those guys, they didn't get any extension talks. Their options were picked up last year, so they're out in the clear now. After this year, they're restricted free agents, so the Knicks decide they want to let them go. And if they had a bad year, then they're going to go. Kevin Knox is under another year of control. They just picked up his option. He's also a free agent at the end of the year if they don't extend him before the end of the season. But he is the type of player that you could see this organization taking a like to. I feel like they trust Knox more than those other 2 guys. Knox is going to get a lot more playing time than the other 2. I don't think they trust Dennis Smith Jr. at all. From what you've seen in the past couple of games, from what you've seen last season, which what he did was, he completely lost his confidence. He was playing without a head, was making boneheaded plays almost every single game. So I think that over time, I didn't really see much improvement for Dennis Smith Jr. He was playing with a little bit more confidence, but his athleticism and his aggressiveness towards the hoop was not the same. I've seen Frank obviously could turn into one of the best defensive guards in the league, But other than that, right now, it's going to be more of a focus on guys like Kevin Knox, guys like RJ Barrett, Obi Toppin, guys that have the potential to potentially turn into one of the best players on this team, which isn't really saying much, but.
Well, I think there's a couple things. I think going off of Dennis Smith Jr., taking consideration last year, he did have a couple of personal situations he had to take care of, which could have probably played into his head a little bit. But the other thing about all these guys that played last year, when they had Fizdale and then he got let go, basically that whole season, they were always playing the veterans the entire year. I think ultimately, I don't think that's really a fair way to judge these, like a Knox or an RJ Barrett, for example, to judge them based on that. I think Thibodeau, he's going to try to win, but by the same token, I think he's not. I think he understands the direction the Knicks are going. I think the Knicks, let's face it, the Knicks haven't really had anybody that's been able to develop for the past couple of years now, to say the least.
Yep.
But I think Thibodeau, you're getting a guy that's, I think he takes no nonsense in practice, and that's going to set the tone right away. And then also,
this team needs some discipline. This team definitely needs some discipline.
Well, yeah. And then, talking about discipline, they brought in Nerlens Noel to give some competition to Mitchell Robinson at the center position. That was interesting to me. I think for Mitchell Robinson, because I know when he got drafted, there was a lot of talk about him not being 100% mature yet. And I think
definitely still isn't yet. Yeah.
Right. Well, it's not 100% there yet. So that's definitely lit a fire under him. I think ultimately what I think is you're going to see is, because the talent's definitely there for Mitchell Robinson. The only thing is obviously he has to get out of foul trouble. For a guy like the guys that I think that will probably at the end of the day have a future with the Knicks will probably be, in my opinion, RJ Barrett and a guy like Obi Toppin. I don't think you're going to see Kevin Knox make that big of a jump. He's had some spurts up and down.
Listen, it remains to be seen about him. We need to wait a few games into the season, maybe a few weeks, maybe a few months. And let's see exactly how he's progressing and if he's still shooting with the confidence that we saw in the preseason. If he continues to play as well as he did in the preseason, I have to disagree with what you said about him. I feel like if he plays well, if he's hitting his shots and he's contributing to the team, and when he comes in, he has a good plus minus, he will stay on this team for years to come. Because there's, right now, I think what's most important, you were talking about it before, is building a winning culture. And that starts with developing young guys. And he's one of the guys that they're just going to need to take a chance on. They don't need to take a chance on Frank. They have enough point guards. If Quickly turns out to be a great player,
Frank's a bust.
We're all praying that he's going to end up being a great player. But with those other guys, they won't fit in with this team in a few years down the line if they haven't developed as much as a guy like Kevin Knox can. So at the end of the day, it all matters what's going to happen in these next few. This is why I'm very excited as a Knicks fan. Because for the first time in 9.5 months, we're going to see this team play in real games, and in a real game in Madison Square Garden. And we're going to be able to see, without fans, but we're going to be able to see whether or not these guys can actually go out there with a new coach, with a new front office, and do exactly what the coach and the front office have been tasked with doing. And that's building a winning culture, and that's coming together and figuring out what has been going wrong for years and what they could look forward to in the future, because this Knicks team needs a future. At this point, it's enough of waiting in the past, trying to trade for big free agents or trying to sign free agents, trying to trade for big stars. And they just need to learn how to develop young guys. And then that's what's going to create the interest from the big free agents. We're going to have to see within the next few weeks what's going to happen. But as of right now, we can't really say much about these young guys.
Yeah, I agree. That's why I go back to Thibodeau. I think that's why I went back to last year saying, like, my personal guy, Kevin Knox, we haven't seen yet, but that's why we have Thibodeau here. I think that's why I think Thibodeau's after Atkinson, who I preferably wanted as head coach. Thibodeau is probably
I agree. I do too.
Your
Definitely.
best option to develop your guys here with the Knicks, because they haven't had anything for years. But let's move on to across town to Brooklyn, because the Nets, they first of all, flat out destroyed a not so great Warriors team last night without Draymond Green.
Dude,
But
aren't you a Nets fan?
well,
Are you a Knicks fan or a Nets fan?
I don't have a preference of either. I mean, I like the Knicks. I hate either one, honestly, because
Yeah,
I've gone to Nets games when they were in Jersey, and
exactly.
I've
Yeah.
gone to Knicks games as well. So I don't personally. I don't think there's really that big of a rivalry, at least from the past couple years.
There's more of a rivalry in the Nets fans' eyes than there is for Knicks
Right.
fans. Knicks fans don't really care about the Nets. They are
Personally,
better, and it sucks. But the Nets fans end up talking about the Knicks a lot more than Knicks fans talk about the Nets. That's just a fact.
right. And I mean, ultimately, the Nets are going to get more media attention nationally, but the Knicks will always be on the front page and the lead story for the New York media.
Of course.
But for the Nets, so they just blow out Golden State last night. My expectation is you have to, if you're Brooklyn, you have to at least get to the Eastern Conference Finals with KD and Kyrie, preferably the finals at least, preferably that. But you have Kyrie and KD. KD already looks like, based off what we've seen in preseason so far and what we saw last night, he looks like, to me, the same player that he looked like before his injury. I never personally had any concern about his injury, of him coming back, because of how dangerous he is as a scorer and a player overall. But for the Nets, the big question is going to be, can Kyrie stay healthy? And if he can, I think the sky's the limit for Brooklyn.
Yeah, I agree with that. But my biggest concern with this team is their ability to stay healthy and their consistency as in terms with their depth, because their depth right now is very good. It's probably the best in the league.
Yeah.
They have the ability to run teams out of the gym with their second team, which a lot of these teams with the top of the two top players in the league can say. The Lakers have the ability to do that now. They signed those guys. But other than that, you're really looking at no other team that was able to put together a good bench. And the Nets have that, which is a luxury in this league right now.
You have Karis
with two
LeVert
stars.
and Spencer Dinwiddie coming off the bench.
Yeah.
Karis LeVert would probably be starting on any other team right now.
Yeah. He's a stud. And they really made a good draft pick with him. So this team has the ability, definitely, to make the Eastern Conference Finals. But I'm gonna go out on a limb here, and I've been saying this for the past few days to anyone who really wants to listen, but I do not feel like the Brooklyn Nets will make it past the second round of the playoffs. And hear me out. This team, this is the first time these two players who have been competitors for years have been playing together. They looked really good. Trust me, they looked really good. But when one of those guys goes out, when one of those guys goes out, what's going to happen? We have absolutely no idea how that's going to play out. With Kyrie Irving is probably not going to play all 72 games. I can guarantee you that. You know, Kyrie Irving always has his fair share of injuries. He will go out for whatever reason, you know, whether it's a thumb injury, an ankle, whatever it is. He'll go out for something. And when it happens, we're going to have to look to see how the team reacts. So if if all goes well and all goes to plan and they end up picking up where he left off when he comes back, whenever he gets injured, because I feel like it's more of, it's more of an inevitable thing. It's probably going to happen. But looking to their bench and seeing how they respond to one of their star players going out is going to be one of the most important factors going into the postseason. We'll see what happens. Again, like this is looking way, we're through that 2 months where we had to wait for the season. Now we're through the looking glass. We have the ability to finally watch regular season basketball, which is, it's been months, especially for a fan of the Knicks like me, a team who hasn't played in 9.5 months. We could finally say that, and I'm just very happy altogether. I'm not into the Nets, though. I really do not think that team could make it past the second round. They're going to have to deal with teams like the Celtics, who have been playing together for years. They've been on the cusp of the finals 2 years in a row now. You still have the Bucks, who just added Drew Holiday. That's two teams right now that I think could probably beat the Nets.
Okay, so here's the thing.
I don't know if you think anyone else can, but.
Well, here's the thing. If Kyrie and KD do stay healthy, and that's a big if they are staying healthy into the playoffs, I don't really see a team that can beat them. I don't see Milwaukee. To me, first of all, they got Drew Holiday and they had to give up 3 draft picks, which to me was ridiculous. You get Drew Holiday.
They're in a win now mode. It made sense because they had to do it, because without that, Giannis would never have signed that max.
I agree with that, but then they also went to try to get Bogdanovich, and then that fell through. But the point is, I look at Milwaukee, and outside of Giannis, Chris Middleton's very streaky. I know that they got Drew Holiday now, but
He's one of the most. He's one of the most solid 3-point shooters in the league. He's a great compliment to Giannis, who still hasn't really developed that 3-point game.
well, that's a big
And
part of the game, though. That's a big part.
Listen, they've one of the best backcourts in the league. The Bucks. People forget this, that they have a top 3 backcourt in the league now. No matter what you want to say, Chris Middleton was an all-star last year. So a lot of people want to give Chris Middleton crap about not being a solid player, but he is one of the best compliments to a star player in the league. Although they haven't had much success team-wise, he's been a pretty good player.
I would have to. I mean, he was very streaky. He's not a consistent shooter from what I've seen in my watching with the Bucks. But the other thing is, Giannis is going to be the heartbeat of that team, and you get to the playoffs, he has no jump shot. So in that case,
we have no idea.
Well, what did we see in the bubble? Miami destroyed him. He had no jump shot, and he was very easy to guard.
What do you think he worked at the past 2 months, though?
Right, what happened? He also worked a guy that when they blew the 3-1 when they blew that lead in the Eastern Conference Finals to Toronto too.
Listen, they had holes. They had holes in their team. They didn't have a solid point guard. They finally went out and got their guy, and now they have a solid backcourt who can complement Giannis better. They can go to other players to create points by themselves. Chris Middleton, yes, he's more of a spot-up shooter. He can create off the dribble a little bit. By the way, he shot 41.5% from 3 and averaged 21 points per game last season. That's not that streaky to me. That's all I'm saying. Yes, there are games when he's going to go 0 for 5 from 3, but that is what it is. And you have your teammates to pick you up. This Bucks team complements Giannis extremely well because everyone in that starting lineup could shoot threes. Brook Lopez, one of the best shooting big men in the league now, which is crazy. They still have great shooters on that team that can pick anyone else up when they can't, when shots aren't dropping, especially for Giannis. But I think that team is the biggest threat to the Nets in the East as of right now.
I would have to say Miami is. So Milwaukee for me is not until I can see Giannis consistently make a jump shot. Milwaukee's is a regular season team to me. But to me, the biggest.
This is good. I missed this banter, Reed.
The biggest threat to me for the Nets would be Miami. What we saw, the way that the culture that they've been building down there. And they went to the finals for crying out loud in the bubble, and Jimmy Butler
fluke season. It's again, no one knows if that season is going to have any implications on the play of any team going forward. We have no idea whether the Nuggets are going to be as good again ever. We have no idea if the Heat are going to make it to the finals in the next 5 years.
The Nuggets were on their way up before that season.
I agree, but they never in a million years should have beaten the Clippers. That 3-1, whatever that was, that absolute disaster of a performance from Paul George and Kawhi Leonard should never have happened and probably would never happen again. We saw how the Clippers were out for vengeance. They went out last night and absolutely destroyed the defending champions. This is I'm telling you right now, you won't see teams like that not lose to a team that's on the up and coming and isn't really established. And even in both conferences, it doesn't happen normally that that big of an implosion happens for any of the best teams in the league. So I think that all of last season was a complete fluke, but that's not discrediting what the Lakers did.
Next to the Lakers championship then.
I'm not. No. Okay, so listen to what I just said. I am not at all putting an asterisk next to what they did because obviously this is one of the hardest championships ever to win. But what happened in that process of going to try to, make the finals for every team is not accurate. And it's not a good representation of the actual NBA. And in any normal season, you weren't seeing those guys, Donovan Mitchell and Jamal Murray back to back with 55, 54. They were footing when is it ever going to happen? I understand the NBA has changed. Offensive ratings and the pace of play are way higher than they were 10 years ago. So that obviously could happen. It essentially could happen in any game. But all I'm saying is what I saw in the bubble, it was like crazy performance after crazy performance. And stuff kept happening without fans, without any, the only it was like virtual fans. That was it. So at the end of the day, in my opinion, you disagree with me. It is what it is. I think that championship by the Lakers was not a fluke, but I think that every other team.
You just said that whole season was a
okay.
fluke.
Okay, no. I'm saying the process for them to win a championship, right. The whole thing they went through is not a fluke. You can't put an asterisk next to it because it was extremely hard and one of the hardest championships ever to win. I'm saying for other teams that everyone knew the Lakers were going to be good. Everyone knew the Lakers were going to be exactly what they were going to be. LeBron James doesn't choke much. He doesn't lose 3-1 leads. He overcomes 3-1 leads. And Anthony Davis is a top 5 player in the league. 2 top 5 players in the league, very hard to beat in any given season. I think for other teams that no one really saw as being that talented and going that far in the playoffs did. And I think that was a fluke. I think for teams that shouldn't have beaten better teams, beat better teams because those teams were not playing. Listen, the Clippers also, I'm just going to bring this up. The whole thing behind that team was that they had absolutely no help besides Kawhi and Paul George. Montrezl Harrell had an awful postseason. He played awful. He played terrible. They discussed it a lot last night on TNT. But he had an awful season. Players were not well accustomed to being into a bubble. They were in a bubble for 3 months, some of these teams. You're not seeing your family in 2 months. Then they come for the last month. It's a different scenario. It's a different situation. But the Lakers were a different breed. And I'm not discrediting what they did. I'm just discrediting what other teams didn't do. That's all I'm saying.
All right. I think that's a little unfair. 2 things. First of all, in terms of what you're saying is different about the bubble, what I would think is what is different about the bubble is that the whole travel situation is completely different. There's no travel. That the travel
you're staying in a hotel for
travel
months.
To me is completely could change the series in any series. But the thing about the Clippers, when you're talking about the Clippers, I believe the Clippers would have, first of all, their chemistry was off the whole season. Paul George was out right from the start for a while with his shoulder injury. So that right from the start puts the chemistry. They have no chemistry.
They were the only team that could have realistically challenged the Lakers.
Right.
It was the
but
only
I'm
team.
saying that their chemistry, because of their injuries, their chemistry was never 100% there, which is why if you go back in their postseason series against Dallas, that was not even a walk in the park for them. And that really should have been. And I think that's because of their lack of chemistry because of those injuries. Paul George and Kawhi never really got to play together throughout that season.
Well, it was a different team. They were playing, a solid team. They put the Mavs in the East, and who knows how far they go. So I think that that's not realistic as of what would happen in a normal season. Also, given a great team, Porzingis and Luka. Also, Porzingis got hurt at the end too. We're not even remembering the fact that he couldn't play in the last 3 games.
Right,
so,
but
they're a good team.
What I'm trying to say is that I don't think the Clippers series against Dallas should not have been as close as that was, in my opinion. It just the Clippers, the Mavericks were in that series like every game. It was, and yes, because of Porzingis, first of all, getting ejected, and then he was out for that series, that probably played a big part into it. But that was too close right from the start. Even the games, my point is, even the games that they were winning, they were too close. And I think that goes back to their lack of chemistry.
Yeah, and hopefully, listen, you really can't disagree with that. They did not do everything they could have done. Okay, so they signed Kawhi, and then they go out and trade for one of the other best two-way wing players in the league, who no one really thought can complement each other well. One's a shooting guard, small forward, and the other one's a small forward. They play basically the same position. They do the same things on the court. Yes, they're going to shut down a lot of backcourts and teams with great guards who take a lot of shots. They're great. They're both great defenders. But you're definitely right in that team not having much chemistry, because who really thought, if anyone would have asked you, Reed, if anyone would have came out and asked you who would fit best with Kawhi Leonard, if you're Steve Ballmer, if you're the Clippers GM and you need to trade for one superstar in the league, who would it be? It definitely wouldn't be Paul George. That's for sure.
Right, but the problem that the Clippers were facing is Kawhi basically said to them, "Get Paul George, or else I'm not coming here." It was his request.
Well, that's Kawhi. That's all him. So, And whatever Kawhi's reasoning was, and whatever he did to get that to happen, I don't know if his reasoning was sound. I don't feel like him doing that made any sense in hindsight. And
I think it was a power move. He
100% was, just like he forced himself out of San Antonio. It obviously was a power move. He is one of the most successful players in the league in the past 5 years. 6 years, 2 championships, on completely different teams and completely different scenarios and situations. He's established himself as one of the best players in the league. He's allowed to do that. LeBron does it all the time. His agent, Rich Paul, owns the NBA. So NBA, we can talk about that all day. But Kawhi, I just did not make sense to me how they ended up going out and getting Paul George. I don't know how that was the guy who they decided, Kawhi and his camp and the Clippers, deciding to do it at the same time, that was the best fit for them. And they had no center the entire year.
Who would you have gone after?
Realistically, if you're looking at it from, any 2019 standpoint, I feel like getting a guy you could say they didn't have – all right, so yeah, they didn't have the money to sign another max player. They had to trade for one, right? Mm-hmm. So I was going to say Jimmy Butler, but that's out of the question. That's, he was a free agent. You could have either went for the guard, you could have went for a point guard, or you could have went for a big man. And I think realistically they could have went for a guy like, Westbrook. They could have went for a John Wall at the time, who
John Wall
wasn't
had
going to
a
play for another
contract.
year. He wouldn't have played for another year. I'm just saying, in general, who realistically was going to be up for trade. And Paul George wanted out, and they traded him. So that ended up being the best.
Because Kawhi said, "Come here."
Yeah, I mean, obviously it made sense at the end of the day. Paul George, he was in that scenario from the moment that he probably heard that Kawhi wanted to play with him. He was probably like, "Get me out of here." So it ended up working out in that sense. But obviously, you're right about the chemistry in the playoffs last year. They did not have it. They, like you said, were winning very close games. They never looked like they actually had a chance to. I thought watching that series that they get it together eventually, and in the next series come together and play much better. But in the next series against the Nuggets, even the games that they won, they were up way more in the first half. And in the second half, it got closer and closer and closer. Right. And then they pulled off those games. And I was like, maybe this team could actually lose. And maybe they aren't the second best team in the West. And obviously the Nuggets ended up winning. I'm not saying I predicted that in any sense, but
I think anyone did. I know.
Yeah, no one did. No, obviously not. But the Lakers had the easiest, path to the title, I think.
Absolutely.
In years. That's also another thing that I'm saying. It wasn't because if that happens in real life, the Lakers do exactly what they would have done in the bubble. That's the thing. They're playing these teams that they could have beaten in any other situation. They're playing teams that wouldn't have had any home court advantage. There's a difference, and I don't think people are crediting the fact that home and away it means something in the NBA, especially.
I agree with that. I think it's just unfair to say that I'm going to ignore what the Lakers did and say that was great, but then what all the other teams did, I'm just going to say, oh well, it wouldn't have happened. I just don't think that's fair. I'm
not saying that. Listen, I'm by no means am I saying it wouldn't have happened. I just think it was a fluke. It's not. Listen, there's a difference. The Lakers, again, and I'll say this one more time. The Lakers went through one of the easiest, yes, it was the whole thing. The thing as a whole, the bubble, coronavirus, everything bottled together is an incredibly tough process. The fact that they were sitting on their asses at home for 3 straight months, doing nothing. They weren't playing with anyone. They came back and they were given 7 days. Literally, it was like a week and a half they were given to play. And they came back together and they did something that was extremely hard. They did something hindsight, looking at hindsight, was an extremely hard thing to do. And they ended up doing it perfectly. But all I'm saying, and I'm just saying that the reason why I'm not discrediting them and I'm discrediting everyone else is because they were that good from the start. They played exactly the same as they did all season. They came into the bubble. They had no differences in how they played. And they benefited from not having to go and travel and play in places that have crazy atmospheres. They didn't have to play in any one of those cities. They were playing in Orlando the entire time. That was obviously to LeBron and AD's benefit. LeBron, put LeBron in any scenario, he's going to do well. I think for everyone else, for all the other teams, you have to look at it for the fact that they were beating teams that weren't playing as well because of the bubble. That's why I'm discrediting what they did. I don't think that the Clippers blow that 3-1 lead in any normal series. At home, I don't think Montrezl Harrell ends up playing as bad. Whatever happened with him with his personal issues, the season would have been done in June. So whatever happens in July happens in July. Everything is screwed up by COVID and establishing the fact that these teams did what they did without any crazy scenarios at play is just false. You can't do that. But the Lakers were that good the entire time. They didn't stray from what they originally did. And they didn't beat any team that was playing just as bad before the bubble. So, there's a difference in my opinion. And that's just my opinion.
I think the Lakers before the bubble, I mean, they were obviously destroying the bad teams as they should have. But the Clippers had their number.
Yes.
Before that bubble. And I think I agree that the Lakers definitely had the advantage because of the bubble. And I think the bubble definitely played a disadvantage to the Clippers. And
it just sucks that they didn't get to play. I think everyone deep down was expecting it and really wanted to see it. And I feel like that would have been the best possible scenario to come out of the bubble. I feel like if that happened, then there would be less of a question mark as to what happened with the rest of the teams. I think, I still think the Lakers easily win. With how bad the Clippers were playing, I think that would have been another easy win for the Lakers. But that's also not really saying much because they had to play, the Nuggets, which are a good team, good solid team. But I think Nuggets are not the Clippers.
If the chemistry was there, I think the Clippers would have had a really good shot at knocking them off.
No, I agree, definitely.
All right, so let's look at for this season then. Are the Lakers going to repeat? I think the Lakers definitely obviously they have the best duo, LeBron and AD. They brought in six-man finalist Dennis Schroeder in a trade from OKC.
And the actual six-man of the year.
The six-man, yep. And then
yeah.
I think will the Lakers repeat? I think at the end of the day, ultimately, yes. But, there's two questions. First of all, is the quick turnaround of the season going to be a disadvantage for the Lakers? Probably not, because knowing the Lakers will just rest LeBron for a majority.
Yeah, he probably won't play. Last night we saw him sit almost the entire fourth quarter. He played 29 minutes. They're probably not going to play him over 30 minutes for the first few weeks of the season. You got to ease him in. He's getting up there. He's old. He's a veteran in this league. This is his 18th season, which is absolutely absurd. And they need to play it safe. Yeah, LeBron is going to sit. This team, you can't really look at it for what they're doing in the first few weeks of the regular season. They're still that good. And they just added probably had the best free agent and trade acquisitions this whole offseason. They benefited the most from the moves that they made, more than any other team, in my opinion, besides maybe the Suns, who got Chris Paul. There's obviously the need for LeBron not for him. There's obviously a need for AD to pick up the slack for when LeBron isn't playing and eventually carry the team, which I think he can do now because he developed the 3-point shot and he's going to be unstoppable. He's also my MVP pick, but that's neither here nor there. But listen, it's definitely their season to lose, in my opinion. It's just like the Warriors, where everyone thought that they were the favorites, and if they didn't lose, then it would be that on them. And it's the same way. It's the exact same scenario right now.
So then now looking forward, though, the top competitors for the Clippers, the Lakers rather, I would have to say, I still think the Clippers are going to be up there. Assuming that they do get their chemistry together, and now they have a new coach. I mean, you had Paul George now going back and forth with Doc Rivers, who's no longer there. But so I think if their chemistry can get together, I think they're going to be right there again. But I also think Denver is also looming out there. I understand you're saying that the bubble was a fluke for them because of the circumstances, but I saw them, they were developing up the ladder before that season, before
I agree. I just didn't think that they'd get to the conference finals. I think they'd be a second round team and they'd show exactly what they could have done in a few years, because they're still far away from being at their highest potential. Those best players on that team, Jokic and obviously Jamal Murray, are still very young. They're relatively young. They have a long future ahead of them. So I didn't think that necessarily this season would be the season for them to come out and play as well as they did. I do agree with you that they are one of the best up-and-coming teams in the West, though.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I still think the Clippers, as I said, will probably still have the upper hand. Because ultimately, what happened was, to me, partially, yes, it was a situation with what was going on where the setting was, but I also think if they had their chemistry together, they would have knocked off Denver and they would have met in the Western Conference Finals. But
yeah, that really isn't saying much, because I feel like they were that much more talented than Denver at the end of the day. They just weren't playing up to it. That's why they lost.
right, yeah, and absolutely. All right, so the last topic here then. So James Harden has been in the news a lot lately. After the Houston trades, Russell Westbrook, who gets out of Houston, James Harden basically ultimately has requested a trade out of Houston from the Rockets. He has Brooklyn, Philadelphia, Milwaukee, and Miami on his preferred trade list. A couple of things. First of all, you have the report today that he was in a strip club again. There's a video that has surfaced of him, which seems like he's going to be out for their opener tonight. And a lot of their players probably won't be able to play because of that. But
no, it's not. It was because of KJ Martin. KJ Martin tested positive, and I think he was the one, because they originally said, like, everyone thought that it could have been James Harden, which would have been a huge scandal, especially because they knew exactly what where he was. If you did that for any other, if you put your coworkers in harm at any other job, you'd probably get fired and you'd probably be fined. He will get fined 100%, almost guaranteed. He's going to get a huge fine. Oh yeah, no. Under his contract where he's making more than $40 million a year, literally.
He'd probably do it again.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, but so James Harden, so those teams are on his trade list. First of all, looking at it from Houston's standpoint, Houston should be in no rush to move him. They don't even have to abide by his list. They should be going for the best offer possible, as that's what you do for good business. But looking at it for James Harden, the best spot that could offer the most, first of all, to me, it would be you have Philadelphia and Miami are the two teams. Philadelphia has reportedly made Ben Simmons available in the trade discussions, and they're probably going to have to be giving up a lot of picks. So that's the only thing about Philadelphia, I think, is you have Daryl Morey, who's now the GM up there. And then you have Philman Fertitta, if I think I say his name right, the owner down in Houston, who was the former boss of now Daryl Morey. The way everything ended in Houston with Daryl Morey's tweets about China while the NBA was on their ground and they lost all advertising money, everything. I'm not 100% sure if he will be willing, Fertitta that is, to just gift wrap James Harden to his former employee.
Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily gift wrapping if you're getting back Simmons in return. I think that's why Harden to Philly is probably the most likely scenario out of all the teams that he listed, because they have the most assets and they're willing to give the most, because Harden's former GM is currently with that team. He obviously wants him back. Right,
but I think so. Here, I think Philadelphia, at the end of the day, if no team is willing to give up what Houston would be asking for, then yes, I believe Philadelphia will get it. But I believe ultimately that, in my opinion, although it sounds like Miami they've been already taking themselves out of this consideration, I thought that Miami had a really good offer that could have given Houston Tyler Hero and Duncan Robinson. And in addition to that, they had Precious Achua, who was taken later on in the draft, but was, from a lot of people, says is a top 10 talent from the draft. I think if you're giving Tyler Hero and Duncan Robinson up,
So if I'm Houston, I never accept that in a million years. Literally a million years. You're trading one of the top 4 players in the league for 3 guys. One guy who is going to be a solid scorer and and a solid player in Tyler Harrow, and Duncan Robinson up until this year was he rode the bench. He's obviously a great shooter, good value in that. He's a shooter, but Precious. Those 3 guys do not add up nearly to the value that James Harden brings in any trade, and he will demand in any given trade that Houston wants to make with any team. So, if in my opinion, I don't think that. I just think that Philly's offer. You're offering a star. You're offering a star in return for another star, one that's way younger than one you'd be trading for. So that is by far the best value that Houston can get. I think that if they're looking to rebuild, they could take the Miami deal, which would have to include a few more picks, definitely.
I'm probably Fiverr. If you're talking about Miami. I'm saying, well, for Philadelphia, if you're going back to Philadelphia,
yeah,
they're probably going to want Fiverr in that package as well. And I'm not 100% sold if they're going to want to give up Fiverr in that. If they're going to want to give him up, that's the other thing to think about. If you're the Sixers, but
yeah, I mean, hey. We don't know how this is going to turn out. We have no idea what's going to end up happening. Right now, James Harden is being an absolute cancer for his team, which this is what NBA players do when they don't want to play for a team, which is it's sad. And in the next collective bargaining agreement, they're going to need to figure out a way to stop giving the players as much power as they do. So in any other league, no player would be like, hey, listen, I'm not going to play. He has 4 more years.
Well, the NFL has done
4 more years in his contract, right? Isn't it like 4 more years?
He still has 2 years.
So, yeah.
Yes, 2 years.
2 years. Okay, so he has 2 more years left. He has absolutely no power to say where he wants to play at all. You just re-signed a year or 2 ago. You have to stay there. That's just what happens.
Well, the NFL
and forcing yourself out and trying to hamper a team that has some talent and could win some games is honestly sad in this league, and it needs to be fixed at some point. The owners are probably pissed too. They're probably pissed. They definitely want to see some change. They've relatively little to no power. And it sucks for them.
The NFL does the same. There's players in the NFL that are kind of doing the same thing, though, or taking over control. Look,
have nowhere near as big of an effect.
What's
and
that?
They don't get who they want. If they say I want to get traded to this team, blah blah blah. It's more of a contract dispute thing. It's more of holding out and saying I need money than I'm going to force a trade because you see that occasionally.
Either way, it still has the same negative effect on the team.
Yeah, but I'm just saying. You can't compare the two because in the NBA, the players and the agents have way more power than the front offices do, and you know that. They can effectively make or break a team, any team, unless they've been willing to screw that that team up. The players don't really care what the owners and the front offices say if they just want to play somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean the players obviously. One player, obviously, yes, and the NBA will take over, can make or break a team because that's just the kind of sport that the basketball is. But I think ultimately, you're seeing it from. I think it's carried on from the NFL. You're seeing it evolve from other sports is what I think it's coming from. Ultimately, with the NBA.
Yeah, I just think it's way worse in the NBA. I think it's.
Oh yeah, totally. Right, because one player can make or break it.
Well, I'm not even just saying that because the amount of power that these players have gotten over the years, it's not even. Yes, that does contribute to it. The fact that there's only 12 to 15 players in any given roster, and one player can obviously, like you said, make or break a team. I just think it's gotten to the point where the agents have way more power in leveraging that star power from any of these players. So I think that's gotten to a point where it's toxic and tampering as well because players are just, talking to everyone else. They're always in discussions with each other. That's what Kyrie and KD did. That's what a lot of other players did. And that's just what's going to keep happening because when these players have this much power, they could just, be like, hey, let's play. You know what I mean? The NBA can't stop at this point unless they change something in the CBA.
And you look at LeBron. LeBron basically set the standard first with going to Miami, and then Anthony Davis, who got himself out of there under the contract and basically said, get me to the Lakers or else. And I think that's the other thing that has also put some players on notice in the NBA. But going back to James Harden specifically, I think I want to touch just on the Nets aspect, who's been on his list, because that was his top request. If I'm Brooklyn, I have no interest in getting James Harden.
I agree.
You have Karis LeVert. First of all, you're going to give him up. You're going to be giving up the farm, and this would be the Boston trade 2.0. You have a 2-year window basically right now with Kyrie and KD. So if you give up the farm for that, you're going to be right in the same situation of rebuilding that team from when you did the trade with the Celtics. And knowing that Sean Marks rebuilt that team from the bottom up, I don't think he has any interest in doing that. And the other thing is the Nets do stuff very secretly. Like, for example, the Steve Nash hire came out. No one was talking about it. They don't really leak anything to the media for when they make moves like that. So this James Harden to Brooklyn's situation, I think, is ultimately a leak from Harden's camp. Brooklyn, I don't think, has any interest in this. You're giving up Karis LeVert, who's a very top weapon off the bench for the Nets. And the other thing is Houston's going to have no interest. That's not enough of a package for Houston. Spencer Dinwiddie, Karis LeVert.
Yeah, they definitely don't have enough to give up for a top 4 player in the NBA. But to say that this would be along the lines of the Boston trade, I don't think that it really has a lot of parallels. I feel like this is a trade for, a superstar in the middle of his prime. It's not for two guys who have been washed up for 3 years at this point and who are in their late 30s. And, they wouldn't be giving up. Yes, you're right in the sense that they'd be giving up their future, but they'd be giving up their future for the now. And they'd be able to build their future in I don't think they have enough. I'm not saying that they ever do it in a million years. I agree with the fact that they shouldn't do it, but I'm just saying it wouldn't be anything like the Boston trade.
But I think the age difference is definitely different. But I think the point of what I'm saying is similar. Is you don't have a long-term commitment. He hasn't given a long-term commitment really to anyone from what I've seen. You have no long-term commitment from him. You're giving up the farm for him. If he walks,
well, I'm sure if they traded for him, I'm sure he'd be like, all right, listen, yeah, I'll stay here. Like, if we continue to win, if the 3 of them are on the same team, you can basically guarantee a championship. Like, there's just as long as they're able to share the ball in a sense that they'd all be getting enough touches.
That's the other question. I don't think Harden can share the ball.
I agree. I think it would be an absolutely awful decision on behalf of the Nets, and I don't think they'll ever do it. And that's why Harden came out with the list of the other 4 teams after the Nets said, like, no, like, we can't do that.
Yeah, I totally agree. The Nets are set with what they have right now with Kyrie and KD. And first of all, and then you don't want someone that's been a cancer right now coming into that locker room. I mean, it's kind of a shadow hanging over that team right now, but with that rumor coming out. But you don't want that coming over into your locker room. And, oh, by the way, he shows up for the season overweight, and he's showing up to strip clubs. You don't need that, especially.
But he could still go out there and score 50. That's what everyone keeps saying. There are some players that you give that leeway to who don't really practice that much. Allen Iverson, who don't really practice that much, who they basically give all the power over. And all these players who aren't nearly as good have to go into practice every day, have to bust their asses, have to work to get minutes. And guys like that who are just that good don't really have to follow the same rules and the same, statutes that everyone else does. So that's why they have no problem as an organization with what Harden's always done. It's always been this thing that he's always gone to strip clubs all the time. I obviously understand not during a pandemic.
Right.
It's not nearly the same as going, maskless, especially during this NBA season when they've been very, very strict with the cases. They've done a great job already at limiting them. They tested 560 people and 50 were positive, and now it's down to 10, which is going to go up now because people aren't being smart. And this is something that everyone needs to come together and be like, do we want a season or do we not? And guys who want to go to strip clubs, guys who want to party, guys who want to, hook up with girls, without masks, it's just you got to learn where to pick and choose your battles, and this is just not a time, especially for these guys who have millions and millions of dollars. They need to set the tone for the population. If you can't sacrifice, a few hours, most of your hours of your day to social distancing and wearing masks, why do you think anyone else would follow it? You think the people who look up to these guys are just going to be like, okay, yeah, let me wear a mask and let me not go to strip clubs. If these people are going to strip clubs, the fans are going to be like, fuck it. You know what I mean? I'm sorry. I don't know if I'm allowed to curse, but yeah, it's
They don't care.
A stupid thing. The fact that these NBA players can't, you know what? I don't even want to say anything else. You know what I mean?
I think ultimately at the end of the day, this season's going to have a lot of postponements, and there's going to be a lot of stars that are going to have to sit out because of all this. But then just tying it back to James Harden, I think if he was to go to Brooklyn, which obviously isn't going to happen, the biggest problem they're going to face is sharing the ball. And that's just, you don't need that for a team that has already 2 superstars on the team and a boatload of deep depth on your roster.
Yeah, if they keep playing well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. There's no point.
Right. But that's all we got for you today here on Views from the Booth. For Bryce Gelman, I'm your host, Reed Becker, and we'll see you next time on Views from the Booth.